The fire at the center of the Three Fires camp had not crackled for the length of 7 breaths. Old Vesh stood at the foot of the stone altar, with his head bowed and his hands open at his sides, like a man who had nothing left to give. The frost on his beard had thickened in the cold of 5 moons after the snow first fell, and his daughter knelt beside him, her wrists bound in front with a strip of dark sinew, her copper hair matted with the dust of the long walk from the river. The bruise across her left cheekbone was the color of plum flesh just beginning to turn. The chief of the Three Fires camp, Drac, broad as a bull moose's shoulders, 3 braids running heavy down his back, the antler-handled stone axe across his belt, stood on the other side of the altar with his arms crossed and his weight pushed forward onto the balls of his feet, the way a man stands when he intends to claim something he believes is already his. "The blood dead is 2 summers old," Drac said. His voice carried over the fire, as if the cold itself had stepped aside to let it through. "Your son broke my brother's neck at the salt spring. Your son is gone where neither of us can reach him. The debt remains." Old Vesh did not lift his head. "I take the daughter," Drac said. The whole camp drew its breath at the same time and held it. It was Nara, 18 winters, daughter of Vesh, herb knower of the Three Fires camp, whose name no one spoke aloud as the chief stepped forward and laid his thick hand across the back of her bound wrists. She did not lift her face. Her hands did not move. The braid down her back had come loose at the end where the sinew had cut through her skin, and a thread of dried blood had crusted there. Then, from the high black mouth of the Cave of Echoes that rose at the eastern edge of the camp, a man stepped down out of shadow. He had not been seen at the Three Fires camp for 3 winters. The council had called him a ghost, and then they had called him nothing at all, because to speak the name of one the spirits had taken was to invite the spirits to come for another. He stood a full head taller than any in the camp. The bearskin cloak across his shoulders carried the long, curved claws of the bear that had killed his second brother. The scar across the left side of his face, long, pale, run from the temple down through the jaw, was the work of an animal that no one in the Three Fires camp had ever met and lived. He carried in his arms a bundle the size of a small child. He set the bundle down on the flat stone of the altar, with the slow care of a man laying out his own dead. He drew back the elk hide cover. Inside, 5 long mammoth tusks lay one across the other, ivory the color of a winter dawn, each as long as a grown man's arm and as thick at the root as a child's wrist. He lifted his head and looked at the chief over the fire. "She is mine now," he said. It was the first sound the camp had heard from him in 3 winters, and the wind, when it came down off the hill of the White Bear, carried it back into the cave as if the cave itself were learning, for the first time, the sound of his voice. To understand why Nara of the Three Fires camp knelt in the dust that night and did not lift her face, one must go back 23 moons. Her father, Vesh, had been a man of standing once. He had been called Vesh, who reads the sky, in the long council summers when the elders gathered at the salt spring to argue over the meaning of birds. He had 2 sons and 1 daughter, and his hide and bone shelter sat at the warm side of the central fire, and the herb bundles his daughter dried under the smoke rack of his lean-to were taken in trade as far as the camp of the Black Stones and the gathering at the Bone Hill. Nara was the one who walked with him to the salt spring when she was 12 winters old. She remembered the chips of clear quartz scattered there in the cracked ground like the spilled teeth of a giant. She remembered the way her father stood at the spring's edge and held his open hand out flat and waited for the breath of warm air that came out of the rock. Proof, he said, that something living slept beneath the world and would one day wake. It was at the salt spring that her older brother, Ren, broke the neck of Drac's brother in a fight over an obsidian blade. Ren fled into the country beyond the hill of the White Bear. The wolves came back to the Three Fires camp that winter and circled the lean-to of Vesh 3 nights in a row. And on the 3rd dawn, the elders said that the spirits had taken Ren for what he had done, and his name was not to be spoken aloud again. But the debt, the elders said, remained. For 2 summers, Drac had been patient. The chief had taken Vesh's second son, Mek, as a hunter in his own band, and Mek had been a good hunter, and the debt had paused. But Mek had broken through the ice of the river of Longstones 1 moon before the great melt, and his body had not been found. and Drac had stood at the funeral fire with his arms crossed and a face that gave nothing away. The night after the funeral, he came to Vesh's lean-to and said the debt was now whole again, and he would take it in flesh, and the flesh he would take was Nara. Vesh did not weep. He did not strike out. He sat by the cold ash of his fire pit for 2 whole days, and he ate nothing. And on the 3rd dawn, he walked out of his lean-to in the white, woolly cloak of an elder going to council. And he walked his daughter by the wrist to the central fire to give her over to the chief. Nara did not weep either. She had wept herself empty in the night beside her father, and now she had nothing left in her eyes. The cold had set her bones, and the bruise on her cheek was from the open hand of Drac's first wife, a woman who had not wanted a young rival in her own lean-to, and had said so with a slap. When the stranger from the cave mouth set down the bundle of 5 mammoth tusks on the altar, Nara did not lift her face right away. She lifted it only when the wind brought her the smell of him, a smell she did not know, of old bear fat and stone dust and a kind of smoke that did not come from the central fire. She raised her eyes then, and she saw the man who had said her name as if she were already his. And the first thing she thought in 23 moons, that was not a thought of her father or her brothers or her dead hope, was, I have not seen this man before. He is not of the 3 Fires camp. He is not of any tribe I have ever known. And under that thought, smaller and sharper, a second one rose. He has not come for the chief's gold or for vengeance. He has come for me. His name was Ka. The elders of the 3 Fires camp, who were old enough to remember, said Ka had been born at the camp itself, 4th son of the woman who had been the first shaman to walk down out of the Cave of Echoes alive after a 3-day fast. He had hunted for the 3 Fires camp until the winter, when the great fire took the southern lean-tos and the white sickness took his mother and his 3 brothers in the space of 1 moon. He had buried them with his own hands at the edge of the long pine grove. And then, the elders said, he had walked into the Cave of Echoes, and the cave had not given him back. Hunters at the salt spring sometimes claimed to have seen him. They said his hair had grown long down his back. They said his shadow fell longer than a man's shadow ought to fall. The wolves of the hill of the White Bear, the hunters said, did not run from him. They walked beside him as if they were his own dogs. The scar across the left side of his face was, the elders said, the work of a cave bear he had met in the 3rd winter after his mother died. The bear had taken his eyebrow and a slice of his cheekbone and the upper edge of his jaw before he had set his flint blade into the soft place under its ribs and finished it. He had brought the claws back. They were the claws now sewn into the bearskin cloak across his shoulders. He had not brought meat. He had eaten alone in the cave for the rest of that winter, the elders said, and a man who ate alone in a cave with the spirits, for any reason, was a man with whom the spirits would always afterward speak. Drac had not moved. He stood at the altar with his thick hand still resting across the back of Nara's bound wrists, and his eyes, small and dark above the broad bridge of his nose, moved slowly from the 5 tusks to the man on the other side of the fire. He had known Ka once. They had hunted the great elk of the Longtooth Pass together when both of them were younger. He had not spoken of Ka for 3 winters, because Ka was a name a chief did not say. He spoke it now. Ka, who walks with wolves, he said, you have come down. Ka did not answer him directly. He moved his eyes, slowly, the way a man moves his eyes when he wants every other man in the camp to follow them, from Drac's face to the bundle of tusks on the altar. 5 tusks, he said. I have walked the country of the long cold for 3 winters, and these are the 5 longest I have found. Your brother's life is paid, and your blood debt with this house is closed, and the daughter walks back to her own fire tonight unmarked. A murmur ran around the council circle. Drac's first wife, the one who had bruised Nara's cheek, lifted her chin and laughed once, short and sharp, and was silent. Drac did not laugh. A blood debt, Drac said, is paid in blood, not in tusks. And Ka's hand moved down to his hip then, and the elders who had been watching closest said afterward that they had thought he was reaching for the flint blade at his belt. He was not. He took something smaller from a pouch of black hide and laid it on the stone of the altar beside the tusks. It was no larger than a child's tooth, It was a child's tooth, a small white milk tooth, brown at the root, threaded onto a single strand of dark hide. Old Vesh saw it first. He made a sound none of the council had ever heard a man make before. And he stepped back from the altar, and his open hands came up across his mouth, and he sat down where he had been standing. Nara looked at the tooth. For the first time that night, she lifted her face to the man who had walked down out of the cave, and the two of them looked at each other across the fire. Ka did not smile, but the hand he had set on the altar moved, very slightly, and unfolded, palm up, toward her. It was a gesture she had not seen since she was 7 winters old. It was then, in front of the whole council of the Three Fires camp, that Nara of the herb bundles knelt down on the dust and wept. And the chief, for the first time that night, took a half-step back. The council did not decide that night. Old Olda, the singing woman, who was older than any other elder of the Three Fires camp, and whose voice was used only for council and for funerals, rose from her place by the women's fire and said the matter would wait until the dawn of the third sun, when the council could be whole and the chief's mind could cool. The chief said nothing. He looked once more at the tooth on the altar, and he turned and he walked back to his lean-to, and his first wife followed at his shoulder with her chin held high. Ka carried the bundle of tusks back across the fire circle. He stopped at the place where Vesh had sat down, and he set the tusks down on the ground beside the old man and laid his open palm, very briefly, across the crown of the old man's head, the way a son lays his hand on the head of a father. Then he walked to Nara, and he took the sinew off her wrists with the small flint blade at his belt, and he lifted her, not roughly, but with the same care he had used to lay down the tusks, and he carried her up the long path that led to the mouth of the Cave of Echoes. The camp watched them go. The wind came down off the hill of the White Bear, and the smoke of the central fire bent eastward in the cold, and the wolves on the far ridge began, for the first time that night, to call to one another. On the first night, Nara did not speak. She sat at the edge of the small fire Ka had built in the front chamber of the cave, and she watched her own bound and scraped wrists in the firelight, and she did not lift her face to him. He did not press her. He set down a bowl carved from the hollow of a hoof bone, and he ladled into it warm marrow broth from the small pot at the fire. And he set the bowl on the flat stone in front of her, and he stepped back. She did not eat for the first watch. She drank finely when the fire was low. She drank the broth in long, slow swallows, and she set the bowl down empty. And she said, without lifting her face, "Why did you keep it?" "The tooth," he said. "Yes." "I found it," Ka said, 12 winters ago at the edge of the lower spring, in the dust beside the place where the children played. I knew it was yours because I knew your mother. I had no use for it. I kept it because I had no use for it. Nara was silent a long time. "You knew my mother," she said. "I hunted with your father when he and I were boys. Your mother sang the old songs at the long fire when we came back. She had a voice like a flute carved out of crane bone." Nara did not answer that. On the second night, the wolves came down to the cave. Ka heard them before she did. He stood up from his place at the back of the chamber where he had been sharpening the long edge of his flint spear, and he walked to the cave mouth and listened. The wolves did not howl. They moved in single file down the long path from the upper ridge, and they sat, 8 of them, 6 gray and 2 black, at a distance of perhaps 20 paces from the cave mouth, and they did not move. "Who feeds them?" Nara said. "No one feeds them," Ka said. "They eat what they catch." "Why do they sit there?" "They sit there when something is coming up the path." He turned back into the chamber, and he set the spear across his knees, and he sat down beside the fire. And he did not move again until the dawn began to come gray at the cave mouth and the wolves had melted back up the ridge. On the third morning, when the wolves had been silent the night through, the long shadow of a man fell across the cave mouth. It was not Drak. It was Drak's nephew, a thick-shouldered boy called Holk, who carried a spear as long as he was tall and who had served Drak's first wife as her own runner since the boy was 12 winters old. He stopped at the threshold of the cave. He looked at Nara across the cold ash of the morning fire, and his eyes moved up to Ka, and he swallowed once. "My uncle says," Holk began, and his voice cracked. "Speak," Ka said. "My uncle says the council will be called on the dawn of the third sun, as the singing woman ordered. He says," Hulk swallowed again, "he says you are to bring the woman to the council yourself. He says the tooth on the altar is a thing for shamans, not for chiefs, and the dead is a thing for chiefs, not for shamans. He says if you do not bring her, he will come up the path himself, and he will not come up alone." Ka did not stand up. He looked at the boy across the cold fire for the space of 3 breaths. "Tell your uncle," he said, "that the woman will walk down to the council herself when the dawn of the third sun comes. She walks down with me at her right side. She walks back up with me at her right side. No man of the camp lays a hand on her between the cave mouth and the council fire, and no man of the camp lays a hand on her at the council fire either. The dust at her feet is mine, until she says it is not." Hulk did not answer. He looked once more at Nara, and his eyes, the elders said afterward, were the eyes of a boy who had been given a task too heavy for the season of his life. Then he turned and he walked back down the long path. Nara watched him go. She did not lift her face to Ka until the boy had passed out of sight at the far bend of the path. Then she said, and her voice, the elders said afterward, was a voice the camp had not heard from her since the morning of her brother's funeral, "I can walk myself." Ka looked at her. "I know," he said. That afternoon, when the sun had risen high enough to throw light into the front chamber of the cave, but not so high that the light reached the inner wall, Ka moved a flat stone aside at the back of the chamber and took out, from beneath it, a bundle wrapped in old hide. He brought it to the fire, and he sat down across from Nara, and he set the bundle down between them. He did not open it. "I do not show this to anyone," he said. "I have not shown it to anyone since the winter my mother died. I show it to you now because you have asked me a question with your eyes for 2 nights, and you have not asked it with your mouth, and I will not make you ask it with your mouth." Nara did not move. He unwrapped the bundle. Inside, in the firelight, lay a long, flat piece of pale stone the size of a man's forearm, and across its smooth face was painted, in deep red ochre and in charcoal black, and in the rust brown of the iron earth that was found in the country beyond the long cold, a procession of figures. There were running bison. There were 2 long-tusked mammoths. There were small dark figures, no taller than a man's thumb, with spears, and one of the small figures stood at the front with his arms held up over his head, and beside him, on her own 2 feet, stood a woman. The woman was no taller than a man's thumb either, but her hair was painted in red. Nara looked at the painted stone for a long time. "That is me," she said at last, "and my mother." Ka said nothing. "My mother painted this," Nara said. "I remember the bowl of ochre. I remember the small brush she made out of the spruce root and the rabbit tail. I remember the night she made it. There was a snowstorm. The fire bent sideways. She painted me at the front because—" Nara stopped. She looked up at Ka. "Why is this in your cave?" "Because she gave it to me," he said. "Why?" "Because when she sang the old songs at the long fire, I sat at the edge of the men's circle, and I listened with my head bent. She saw me. She came out to me after the long song one night. She said she did not believe the spirits had taken me, and she did not believe the cave would keep me. She said when she made a thing of her own hands, she wanted it to live in a place she could not see. She said—" Ka's voice slowed, and the elders who had told this story since said it was the only time they had ever heard Ka hesitate before a sentence. "She said she trusted me to hold what she made until the time came when it should go back." Nara reached across the firelight. She did not lift the painted stone. She laid one finger, just one, against the painted figure of the woman with the red hair, and she held it there. She did not weep this time. She had wept herself empty long before. But her hand, when she drew it back from the stone, was shaking. Ka watched her hand. "You do not owe me anything," he said. "I came down out of the cave because I knew. I do not come down out of caves for any other reason. The tusks were not for you. They were for the dead boy who broke the dead man's neck at the salt spring. The debt is closed. You walk back to your father's fire tonight if you wish, and no man of the Three Fires camp will lay a hand on you, because the council saw what was on the altar, and the council has not yet decided. You owe me nothing." Nara did not answer for a long time. Then she lifted her face to him, the firelight on her bruised cheek, the copper of her hair coming loose from the broken braid. And she said one sentence, in the same voice she had used at the cave mouth the night before. "I will not walk back to my father's fire tonight." She did not say where she would walk instead. She did not have to. Ka lowered his eyes. He folded the painted stone back into its hide, and he set it beside the small fire where it would stay warm. And he stood up, and he walked to the back of the chamber, and he stood there with his back to her for a long count of breaths. When he turned, his face was the face of a man who had been carrying a thing for 12 winters and had, for the first time, set it down. The dawn of the third sun came up gray over the Three Fires camp. Ka and Nara walked down the long path from the cave, with the wolves at the high ridge moving silently behind them, and the smoke of the central fire bending eastward across the snow. Nara walked at his right side. Her wrists were no longer bound. She wore the wolf fur half-cloak across her own shoulders. Ka had cut it for her at dawn from one of the furs that hung at the back of the cave, and her copper hair was braided fresh down her back with a strip of fawn hide. The council of the Three Fires camp was waiting at the central fire. Old Olda, the singing woman, stood at the head of the council circle. Drax stood at the foot. The chief's first wife stood at his right shoulder, her chin lifted. The other elders, 11 of them, sat in the half-circle around the central fire, and their hide cloaks were drawn close against the cold. Vesh sat at the very back of the circle. The 5 mammoth tusks, Ka had carried them back down from the cave at dawn, lay on the flat stone of the altar beside him. The small milk tooth on the strand of dark hide lay on top of them. Ka walked into the circle. He did not take a seat at the men's place. He stood at the open ground in front of the fire, and Nara stood at his right, and he said before any elder could speak, "I will not speak first." The chief called the council. "Let the chief speak." Drac stepped forward. "The blood debt," Drac began, "is a thing of the chiefs. The tooth on the altar is a thing of the shamans. A man who lives alone in a cave for 3 winters. He looked around the circle of elders. Is not a shaman until the council names him one, and the council has not named him one. Old Olda did not move. Drac turned to her. "Singing woman, the man brings 5 tusks to the altar. The tusks are not a payment of blood debt. The tusks are a gift. A gift to the chief is not a payment to the dead. The debt remains. I will take the daughter at the close of this council, as is my right, and the council will witness that I have taken her in payment of the debt my brother left." Old Olda was quiet for a long count. Then she said, "Vesh." The old man at the back of the circle lifted his head. "Speak to the council," Olda said. "Speak the thing you have been carrying." Vesh stood up. He was not steady on his feet. The elders nearest to him put their hands out as if to catch him, but he straightened himself, and he walked slowly to the open ground in front of the fire, and he stood there a moment with his hands clasped at his waist. Then he said, "The blood debt was paid 2 summers ago." A murmur ran around the council circle. Drac did not move, but his jaw tightened. "My son Ren broke the neck of the chief's brother at the salt spring," Vesh said. "That is true. My son fled into the country beyond the hill of the White Bear. The wolves came back to my lean-to 3 nights, and on the 3rd dawn the elders said the spirits had taken him. That is also true." He drew in a long breath. "But my son did not flee unaccompanied," Vesh said. "He went with 3 of the chief's own hunters. The chief had sent them. The chief had said, 'Bring my brother back to me, alive or dead, whichever is found at the end of the trail.' The 3 hunters caught my son at the river, that the long winter does not freeze. They did not bring him back. They opened his throat with a flint blade, and they let the wolves of that country take what they would not carry. And then they came back to the Three Fires camp, and they said they had not found him." Drac's first wife took a half-step backward. "They came to me," Vesh said. All three of them came to me. They came one at a time across the 2 summers, and they each told me the same thing in the same words, because they could not carry the thing they had done. And the third of them, Mike's friend, who fell through the ice. He came to me the night before he died, and he said, "The debt is paid, old man. The chief paid himself in the blood of your son, and he paid himself in silence, and he keeps the silence by taking your daughter now to keep it." The whole council was silent. Drac did not speak. Old Olda stepped down from the head of the circle. She walked the open ground in front of the fire. A thin old woman, hide cloak down to her ankles, the white tuft of an owl feather sewn into the shoulder. She stopped in front of Drac. She did not raise her voice. "Chief," she said, "the council will hear the 3 hunters now. The one who is dead, we will hear in the words of his friend. The 2 who live, we will hear in their own. If their words match the words of Vesh, the blood debt is closed. The daughter walks free. The chief—" She paused. "The chief stands at the foot of the council circle until the council names a new chief." Drac's face did not change. But the first wife, the one who had bruised Nara's cheek, lifted her hand to her mouth, and a sound came out of her that was the sound of a woman who has just heard her own future spoken aloud. The 2 hunters were called. They came in single file to the center of the council circle. They were both younger than Vesh, both older than Ka. The first did not weep. He spoke his piece. And it was the same piece Vesh had spoken, with the same words at the river, that the long winter does not freeze. And when he had finished, he sat down at the back of the circle, and he set his hands on his knees, and he did not lift them again. The second wept. He spoke his piece. It also matched. Drac's first wife, when the second hunter began to speak, turned, and she walked away from the council fire. The chief did not look after her. He stood at the foot of the circle, and his arms, which had been crossed, fell down at his sides, and his 3 braids hung heavy down his back, and he looked, for the first time in 2 summers, like a man whose own weight was more than he could carry. Old Olda stood up at the head of the circle. "The blood debt is closed," she said. The elders did not speak. They lifted their hands, one by one, around the circle, palm up to the council fire, and their hands stayed up until the singing woman lowered her own. "The chief," Olda said, "stands at the foot. The chief's place is open. The council will name a new chief at the next moon." Drac did not look at Ka. He did not look at Nara. He turned, slowly, and he walked out of the council circle and across the open ground of the central fire, and he did not look back. The whole camp watched him go. The wolves at the high ridge, those who had been sitting silently all the morning, stood up as he passed the edge of the camp, and they followed him at a distance of perhaps 30 paces, the way wolves follow a man who is no longer a man of any camp. He did not come back to the 3 Fires camp. By the time the snow began to melt at the southern edge of the hill of the White Bear, the council of the 3 Fires camp had named Old Olda's brother's son to the chief's place. And the daughter of Vesh, Nara, herb knower, painter of her mother's painted stone, had taken her belongings up the long path to the Cave of Echoes and had not come back down. She did not become the wife of Ka. The 3 Fires camp had a name for the bond they made, and the name was older than the name for wife. It was the name spoken at the long fire by the women whose mothers had taught them the old songs, and it meant the one who chose and was chosen, beside the same fire, with no debt between them. It is not a word our tongues still speak. But the camp spoke it then. The singing woman spoke it last of all, and when she had spoken it, the camp was silent for a long count, because they all knew that to speak the old word was to bind the spirits to its keeping. In the summers that followed, the wolves of the hill of the White Bear continued to walk with Ka, and the herb bundles of Nara, dried under the smoke rack at the front of the Cave of Echoes, were taken in trade as far as the camp of the Black Stones and the gathering at the Bone Hill, and farther. Old Vesh did not live to see the next great melt. He died at his own fire in the warm side of the central camp, and his daughter was beside him when he died. And his last word was the name of his wife, with the voice like a flute carved out of crane bone. He was buried at the Long Pine Grove, beside the place where Ka had once buried his own. The painted stone, the one with the small dark figures and the woman with the red hair, was set into the wall of the inner chamber of the Cave of Echoes. where the smoke from the small fire would not blacken it, and where the first light of the spring dawn, when it came in at the angle of the long cold's end, fell across it. It is still there. Some bonds are forged, not in the blood we are born with, but in the cold we survive together. Nara and Ka were no longer of the Three Fires camp. They were no longer of any camp. They were the camp. And when the children of their children sit at the long fire and the singing woman of that night tells the old story, she tells it as it was told to her, and she ends as we end now, with the smoke of the cave fire bending eastward into a winter dawn, and two long shadows on the painted wall of the inner chamber, and the sound of the wind when it comes down off the hill of the White Bear, carrying the first word the cave ever learned to speak. She is mine now.